Friends are forever, but husbands come and go. I heard Elena say those words through the thin wall separating our kitchen from my cluttered home office, where I was hunched over my laptop trying to resurrect another dead hard drive. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, fixing broken things for a living while my marriage crumbled around me like a house built on sand. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is David Miller. I'm 42, work in IT support for a mid-sized insurance company, and apparently I'm disposable, at least according to my wife of 15 years. Elena was on the phone with her best friend Margot again, their daily gossip session that had become as predictable as my morning coffee. I could picture her standing there in our renovated kitchen, the one she'd insisted we couldn't afford, but somehow managed to finance anyway, twirling her highlighted blonde hair around her manicured finger. I mean, seriously, Margot, sometimes I look at him and wonder what I was thinking, Elena continued, her voice carrying that dismissive tone I'd grown to know so well. He just sits in that office all day, fixing computers like some kind of, repair monkey. I saved my work and leaned back in my creaky desk chair, listening to my wife dissect our marriage like a biology student with a dead frog. The house we'd bought in Millbrook Heights, a wannabe upscale neighborhood that was really just overpriced tract housing with pretentious street names, felt smaller every day. Elena had picked it, of course. She always picked everything. "Oh, you should see him at the neighborhood barbecues," she laughed, and I could hear the clink of her wine glass against the granite countertop. He stands there with his beer, trying to talk to the other husbands about sports or whatever, and they don't get him. He's not like them, you know. They're successful, ambitious. They drive nice cars and take their wives on real vacations. I glanced around my office, really just a converted spare bedroom, at the towers of old computer parts, tangled cables, and technical manuals. She wasn't wrong about the mess, but it was organized chaos. Everything had its place, its purpose. Unlike our marriage, apparently. "Trevor gets it," Elena said, and I felt my stomach drop. "When I was showing him that property on Elm Street last week, he said I deserved better, that a woman like me should be with someone who appreciates her ambition." Trevor fucking Kowalski. The sleazy used car dealer who'd been sniffing around Elena's real estate office like a dog in heat. I'd met him exactly once, at the Rotary Club mixer Elena had dragged me to, and he'd spent the entire evening undressing my wife with his eyes while telling anyone who'd listen about his expanding automotive empire. His empire consisted of one lot full of overpriced rust buckets and a smile that belonged in a toothpaste commercial. I know, Elena was saying, but the girls need stability, and David's not a bad father, God, Margot, sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in mediocrity. Our daughters, Sophie, 14, and already showing signs of her mother's disdain for anything she deemed beneath her social aspirations. Mia, 10 and still sweet enough to think her dad hung the moon, though I could see Elena working on that too. They were upstairs, probably on their phones or tablets, living in their own digital worlds, while their parents' marriage died a slow death in the kitchen below. I heard Elena's footsteps on the hardwood floor, moving toward the living room. "Listen, I should go. David's probably wondering where dinner is, and I haven't even thought about it. Maybe I'll just order pizza again." Pizza. Again. Because actually, cooking a meal would interfere with her busy schedule of showing houses to clients who couldn't afford them and complaining about her disappointing husband to anyone who'd listen. The call ended, and I sat there in the silence of my electronic graveyard, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly, more like clarity, the kind of moment when you finally admit something you've been avoiding for years. My marriage was over. Had been for a while, really. I just hadn't been ready to see it. Elena appeared in my doorway, looking like she'd stepped out of a real estate magazine. Even at home, she maintained the polished facade, perfect makeup, designer jeans, jewelry that caught the light just right. She was beautiful, I'd give her that. But beautiful in the way a showroom car is beautiful, all surface shine with nothing substantial underneath. "Hey," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I'm going to grab dinner with Margot tonight. Girl talk, you know how it is." "Sure," I said, turning back to my computer screen. "Sophie's got soccer practice until 7, and Mia has that school project due tomorrow." "Right, you can handle that, can't you?" It wasn't really a question. Elena had been gradually shifting more and more parental responsibilities onto me over the past year, claiming her real estate career was really taking off, and she needed to network more. Networking that apparently involved a lot of wine bars and very few actual home sales. "Of course," I said. "I'll figure something out." She lingered in the doorway for a moment, and I wondered if she was waiting for me to ask about her day, or complain about being left with the kids again, or show some sign that I still cared enough to fight about it. Instead, I kept typing, pretending to be absorbed in diagnostic software while my world quietly rearranged itself around me. "Okay then," she said finally. "Don't wait up." After she left, I sat there listening to the house settle around me. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Upstairs, I could hear the muffled sound of Sophie's music through her bedroom door. Mia was probably in her room too, working on homework or reading one of her fantasy novels. This was my life. Had been for years, really. Elena out networking while I held down the fort, managed the kids, fixed the broken appliances, paid the bills. I'd been so busy keeping everything running that I'd forgotten to notice I was running it alone. My phone buzzed with a text from my buddy Jake from work. "Poker night tomorrow. You in?" I usually said no to Jake's invitations. Elena preferred I stay home in the evenings, claimed she needed my help with the girls. But Elena wasn't here, was she? She was out with Margot, probably complaining about her mediocre husband while eyeing the successful men at whatever trendy spot they'd chosen tonight. I texted back, "Yeah, I'm in." It was a small thing, agreeing to a poker game. But it felt like the first decision I'd made for myself in years. The poker game at Jake's apartment was a revelation, not because I won, I lost $40 and didn't care, but because I'd forgotten what it felt like to be around people who actually seemed to enjoy my company. Jake worked in our IT department too, but unlike me, he'd never gotten married. At 38, he lived in a downtown loft, drove a motorcycle, and seemed genuinely happy with his life. The other guys were a mix, some married, some divorced, some single. But they all had something I'd lost somewhere along the way. They seemed comfortable in their own skin. "So, Miller," said Rick, a divorced accountant who'd been coming to these games for years, "what's the story? Jake's been trying to get you here for what, 2 years?" "Something like that," I said, studying my cards. "Just been busy with family stuff." "Family stuff," repeated Tony, a contractor who'd been married 3 times. "That's what we all say until we realize family stuff is just code for my wife has me on a leash." The other guys laughed, but not in a mean way, more like they understood. "Elena keeps you pretty busy, huh?" Jake asked, and I could hear genuine curiosity in his voice. He'd met Elena at a few company parties over the years, and while he'd never said anything directly, I'd caught him watching her with the kind of expression you'd have while observing an exotic but potentially dangerous animal. "She's got a lot going on with work," I said, which was becoming my standard response to questions about my wife's absence from social events. "Real estate, right?" Rick asked. "Must be doing well. I see her posts on Facebook all the time, always at some fancy restaurant or wine tasting." I looked up from my cards. "You follow Elena on Facebook?" "We're friends on there. She sent me a request after that company picnic last summer." Rick shrugged. "She posts a lot, like a lot. Always looks like she's having a great time." This was news to me. I wasn't much for social media, but I had a Facebook account I barely used. Elena had never mentioned being friends with Rick, or posting regularly. Then again, Elena didn't mention a lot of things to me anymore. "What kind of stuff does she post?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, food pics, selfies with her girlfriends, motivational quotes about success and following your dreams." Rick dealt the next hand. Lot of wine involved, from what I can tell. And she's always tagging that Margot woman. They seem tight. After the game, I drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook Heights, thinking about Elena's social media presence. When I'd gotten home from work that day, she'd been getting ready for another girls' night, the third one this week. She'd been doing her makeup in our bathroom mirror, wearing a dress that seemed awfully fancy for dinner with Margot. "Where are you guys going tonight?" I'd asked. "That new wine bar downtown," she'd said without looking at me. "The one with the live music." "Sounds fun. Maybe we should check it out sometime." She'd paused in applying her lipstick, meeting my eyes in the mirror. Maybe, when things slow down at work. Things were always about to slow down at work. Next month, next quarter, next year. There was always a reason why we couldn't do things together, couldn't take that weekend trip, couldn't have date nights anymore. But somehow, Elena always had time for Margot. When I got home, the house was dark except for the porch light Elena had left on. The girls were asleep, and Elena's car wasn't in the driveway. I checked my phone, 11:47 p.m. Late for dinner, even with wine and live music. I went to my office and, for the first time in years, logged into Facebook. Elena's profile was a revelation. Rick hadn't been kidding. She posted constantly. Photos of elaborate meals, selfies with Margot and other women I didn't recognize, inspirational quotes about living your best life and not settling for less than you deserve. The most recent post, from earlier that evening, showed Elena and Margot at what looked like an upscale restaurant, both holding cocktails and smiling at the camera. "Girls' night with my ride or die. Life's too short for boring people and cheap wine. Living my best life, taupen friends, forever, no regrets." The post had dozens of likes and comments. I scrolled through them, recognizing some names from Elena's work, others I'd never heard of. Several comments were from men, including a few that seemed overly familiar. One comment caught my attention. "Looking gorgeous as always. Save me a dance next time. Trevor." Trevor fucking Kowalski. I clicked on his profile. The guy was even sleazier online than in person, if that was possible. Photos of himself leaning against various cars on his lot, shirtless gym selfies, and what appeared to be a never-ending stream of posts about his success mindset and alpha male lifestyle. His relationship status was listed as single, and his photos suggested he was working hard to stay that way. But what really caught my attention were the comments. Trevor had been commenting on Elena's posts for months, compliments on her appearance, suggestions about restaurants and events, inside jokes that implied they'd been talking outside of social media, and Elena had been responding, laughing at his jokes, thanking him for his recommendations. I scrolled back through Elena's timeline, looking for patterns. The fancy dinners, the wine tastings, the girls' nights that seemed to happen with increasing frequency. In several photos, I could see reflections in windows or mirrors that showed other people, including what looked like men who weren't mentioned in the captions. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Elena. Going to be late. Margot's having a crisis. Don't wait up." I looked at the timestamp on her latest Facebook post. 10:23 p.m., less than 2 hours ago. She and Margot had been at that restaurant, looking anything but crisis-stricken. The post had already accumulated more likes and comments, including another one from Trevor. "Hope you're having as much fun as you look like you are." I sat back in my chair, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. It wasn't quite betrayal yet. I didn't have proof of anything beyond social media flirtation and suspicious timing. But it was the beginning of understanding. The realization that the woman I'd been married to for 15 years had been living a completely different life, one that didn't include me except as an inconvenience to be managed. I heard Elena's car in the driveway at 1:23 a.m. By then, I was in bed, pretending to sleep, listening to her try to move quietly through the house. She slipped into our bathroom, and I could hear water running, the soft sounds of her nighttime routine. When she finally came to bed, she smelled like wine and cigarettes. Elena didn't smoke, and something else. Cologne, maybe. Or aftershave. She settled into her side of the bed, careful not to wake me. But I was already awake, staring at the ceiling in the dark, thinking about Trevor Kowalski's comments and Elena's secret social media life and the growing distance between us that I'd been too busy or too stupid or too comfortable to notice. Friends are forever, but husbands come and go. Elena's words from earlier that day echoed in my head as I lay there next to my wife, feeling like a stranger in my own life. Maybe she was right. Maybe husbands did come and go. But friends? Well, I was beginning to think Elena might be wrong about that too. I started paying attention, really paying attention, for the first time in years. Elena's patterns became clear once I began looking for them. The late nights happened on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always with the same excuse. Margot needed support, or they were networking, or there was some real estate event she couldn't miss. Her phone, which used to sit openly on kitchen counters and coffee tables, was now always face down and within arm's reach. She'd started taking it to the bathroom with her, claiming she was expecting important calls from clients. The biggest tell was her mood. Elena had always been particular about her appearance, but lately she'd been glowing. New clothes appeared in her closet, sexy dresses and tops that never seemed to make it into her rotation when we went out together, which we hadn't done in months. She'd started working out again, something about feeling good in her own skin, and had gotten highlights that made her look 5 years younger. All the signs of a woman having an affair, except she was having it with my knowledge and somehow without my caring as much as I should have. That was the weird part. I felt more curious than devastated, more intrigued than heartbroken. Maybe 15 years of gradual emotional distance had inoculated me against the sharp pain of betrayal. Or maybe I was just relieved to finally understand what had been wrong between us. I decided to test my theory. "Hey," I said on Thursday morning as Elena was getting ready for work. "Want to grab dinner tonight? That Italian place you used to like?" She paused in applying her mascara, meeting my eyes in the bathroom mirror. "Tonight? I can't. Margot and I are meeting with a potential investor for her new development project." "What about tomorrow?" "I think I'm showing houses all day Friday. Rain check?" It was always a rain check. Always next week, next month, when things slowed down. I nodded and kissed her cheek, tasting the expensive foundation she'd started wearing. That evening, I told the girls I was going out for a while and drove to downtown Millbrook. Our little city had been trying to reinvent itself as a trendy destination, with mixed results. The historic downtown had a few decent restaurants and bars, but it was still mostly empty storefronts and wishful thinking. The wine bar Elena had mentioned, Vintage and Vine, was one of the success stories. Through the large front windows, I could see it was busy for a Thursday night. I parked across the street and waited. Elena's white BMW pulled up at 7:47 p.m. She got out wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, something that hugged her curves and showed more leg than she'd shown me in years. But she wasn't alone. Trevor Kowalski climbed out of the passenger seat, and even from across the street, I could see him put his hand on the small of her back as they walked into the restaurant. I sat there for a moment, watching other couples and groups go in and out of the wine bar, trying to figure out how I felt about what I'd just seen. Angry, betrayed, hurt. All of those emotions were there, but they felt distant, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. What I felt most strongly was foolish. Foolish for believing Elena's stories, for not paying attention sooner, for spending years trying to fix a marriage that had been broken beyond repair. And underneath the foolishness was something else. A strange kind of relief. I drove home and spent the evening helping Mia with her math homework and listening to Sophie complain about her English teacher. Normal dad stuff, the kind of routine that had become my real life while Elena lived hers somewhere else. She came home at 11:15 p.m., smelling like wine and that same cologne I'd noticed before. "How was your meeting with the investor?" I asked from the couch, where I was watching SportsCenter. "Oh, good. Really good. He's very interested in Margot's project." Elena kicked off her heels and rubbed her feet. "These networking things go so late, though. I'm exhausted." "I bet. Must be tiring, all that talking about development projects." She looked at me sharply, maybe hearing something in my tone, but I kept my expression neutral. After a moment, she shrugged and headed upstairs. I waited until I heard the shower running, then went to my office and opened Facebook again. Elena had posted a new photo an hour ago, her and Margot at Vintage and Vine, holding wine glasses and smiling. The caption read, "Successful meeting with investors. Sometimes business is a pleasure. Girl boss, networking, I's blessed." But I'd seen Elena go into that restaurant with Trevor, not Margot. Either Margot had been there too and left before Elena, or Elena was creating fictional narratives for social media. Given what I'd observed, I was betting on the latter. I scrolled through the comments on the photo, the usual mix of likes and generic responses, but Trevor had commented within minutes of the post going live. "Success looks good on you. Can't wait to see what's next. Can't wait to see what's next." The phrasing felt intimate, like an inside joke or a reference to future plans. I clicked over to Trevor's profile and scrolled through his recent posts. Lots of photos of cars and gym selfies, but also several posts about living life to the fullest and taking what you deserve. One post from earlier that week caught my attention. A photo of an expensive-looking watch with the caption, "Sometimes you have to invest in yourself. Big moves coming soon. Success, living my best life, or new beginnings." New beginnings. I wondered what kind of new beginnings Trevor had in mind, and whether they included my wife. Over the next week, I developed a routine. I'd tell Elena I was working late or going out with Jake, then I'd follow her. It wasn't hard. Elena had never been particularly observant, and she was too caught up in her own drama to notice her husband's sudden interest in evening activities. The pattern was consistent. Elena would tell me she was meeting Margot, or going to a work event, or supporting her friend through some crisis. Then she'd meet Trevor at various restaurants and bars around town. They'd have dinner, drink wine, and based on their body language, the way he'd touch her arm when he talked, the way she'd lean into him when she laughed, they were definitely sleeping together. What surprised me was how little it hurt. I'd expected devastation, rage, the kind of emotional breakdown you see in movies when someone discovers their spouse cheating. Instead, I felt like I was solving a puzzle, connecting pieces that finally made the bigger picture clear. Elena wasn't happy with our marriage. Hell, I wasn't happy with our marriage either. The difference was that she'd decided to do something about it, while I'd been content to drift along in comfortable misery. But Elena's method, the lying, the social media fiction, the gradual withdrawal from our family while she built a new life with Trevor, that bothered me. Not the affair itself, but the dishonesty. The way she was rewriting our history, making me the villain in her story of personal liberation. I started thinking about what I wanted. Did I want to save our marriage? Did I want to confront Elena and Trevor? Did I want to file for divorce and try to start over at 42? The answer came to me on a Friday night, when I was sitting in my office working on a particularly stubborn laptop while Elena got ready for another girls' night. She came downstairs wearing a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, looking like she was going to a Hollywood premiere instead of casual drinks with Margot. "Don't wait up," she said, barely glancing at me as she grabbed her purse. "Have fun," I replied, not looking up from my work. After she left, I realized I felt nothing. No jealousy, no sadness, no anger. Just a kind of empty relief, like when you finally throw away something you've been meaning to get rid of for years. That's when I knew what I wanted. I wanted Elena to be honest. I wanted her to stop treating me like an idiot who couldn't see what was happening in his own house. I wanted her to take responsibility for her choices instead of creating elaborate fictions to justify them. And if she wouldn't do that voluntarily, well, maybe I'd have to help her along. I picked up my phone and called Jake. "Hey," I said when he answered. "You busy tomorrow night? I think it's time I started saying yes to more of your invitations." "You look different," Jake said as we walked into Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar downtown that served cheap beer and had pool tables that hadn't been level since the Clinton administration. "Good different. Like you've been sleeping better or something." I had been sleeping better, actually. For the first time in months, I wasn't lying awake wondering what was wrong with my marriage. I knew what was wrong with it, and somehow that knowledge was liberating. "Just trying to get out more," I said, ordering a beer from Mickey, the bartender who looked like he'd been working there since the place opened in 1987. Jake had invited 3 other guys from work: Rick from the poker game, a programmer named Steve, and Danny from the help desk. Normal guys with normal problems, the kind of people I'd forgotten how to be around during my years of trying to be the perfect suburban husband. "So Miller's finally off the leash," Rick said, raising his beer in a mock toast. "What's the occasion? Elena have another networking event?" "Something like that," I said, and left it at that. We played pool, talked about work and sports and movies, and I remembered what it felt like to just exist without constantly managing someone else's mood or walking on eggshells around my own life. When Rick suggested we hit another bar after Murphy's closed, I said yes. When Steve mentioned a weekend poker tournament, I said I'd think about it. When Danny invited me to join their Thursday night bowling league, I found myself nodding. "Damn, Miller," Jake said, as we were walking to our cars at the end of the night. "I should have kidnapped you from that house years ago. You're like a different person when you're not worried about getting home by curfew." Curfew. That's exactly what it had been, wasn't it? Elena's subtle but constant pressure to stay home, to be available, to prioritize her needs over everything else. I'd been so busy being the responsible husband and father that I'd forgotten I was allowed to have a life of my own. I got home at 1:30 a.m. to find Elena's car already in the driveway. When I walked into the kitchen, she was sitting at the counter in her robe, drinking tea and scrolling through her phone. "You're out late?" she said without looking up. "So are you," I replied, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge. "I've been home for over an hour. Margot wasn't feeling well, so we cut the evening short." I nodded, not bothering to point out that her Facebook post from 2 hours earlier showed her and Trevor at some upscale cocktail lounge across town. Let her have her stories. I was done trying to make sense of Elena's version of reality. "Where were you?" she asked, and I caught something in her tone. Not concern, exactly, but a kind of territorial curiosity. "Out with Jake and some guys from work. We hit a few bars, played some pool." "That's not really your scene." "Maybe it is now." Elena looked up from her phone, studying my face like she was seeing me for the first time in years. "You seem different lately." "Different how?" "I don't know. More confident, I guess. You've been going out more, spending less time in that office." She paused. "The girls have noticed too. Sophie said you seem happier." "Happier?" "Yeah, I probably was happier. Amazing what a little honesty could do for your mental state, even if you were the only one being honest." "Maybe I'm just trying new things," I said. "You're always talking about personal growth and following your dreams. Figured I should take some of your advice." Something flickered across Elena's face, surprise, maybe, or concern. For months, she'd been the one with the exciting social life while I stayed home with the kids and the household responsibilities. Now I was developing my own interests, my own friends, my own reasons to be out of the house. "Well," she said finally, "I'm glad you're exploring your options." Exploring my options. Interesting choice of words from a woman who'd been exploring Trevor Kowalski for the better part of 6 months. Over the next few weeks, I said yes to everything. Poker nights, bowling leagues, weekend golf games, after-work drinks, a weekend camping trip with Jake and his buddies. I started going to the gym again, not because I was trying to compete with Trevor, though I had to admit the guy was in decent shape, but because I'd forgotten how good it felt to do something physical after sitting at a computer all day. The changes weren't just social. I started paying attention to how I looked, buying clothes that fit properly instead of wearing the same old khakis and polo shirts I'd been cycling through for years. I got a decent haircut from somewhere other than the cheap chain salon in the strip mall. I started reading books again, real books, not just technical manuals and troubleshooting guides. Elena noticed. How could she not? For years, I'd been the predictable one, the guy who stayed home and held down the fort while she lived her exciting life. Now I had my own plans, my own interests, my own reasons to check my phone and smile at messages. "You're going out again?" she asked on a Thursday evening as I was getting ready to meet the guys for bowling. "League night," I said, putting on a shirt I'd bought the week before. "I told you about this." "I know, it's just, you're never home anymore." This from a woman who'd been out 3 nights that week already, but I didn't point that out. Instead, I kissed her cheek and said, "You're always saying how important it is to have your own interests. I'm just taking your advice." The kiss seemed to surprise her. We hadn't been physical in months, not since I'd started noticing the distance between us. But now, with the pressure off, with no expectations or hopes for our relationship, I could be affectionate without it meaning anything. Funny how that worked. "David," she said as I was heading for the door. "Yeah? Are we okay?" It was the first time in months she'd asked me a direct question about our relationship. I turned around and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was still beautiful, still put together, still the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. But she also looked uncertain in a way I hadn't seen before. "We're fine, Elena. Why?" "I don't know. You just seem so independent lately. Like you don't need me anymore." Need her. That was an interesting way to put it. I had needed her. For years. Needed her approval, her attention, her presence in my life to feel complete. But need was different from want, and I was beginning to understand the distinction. "I'm just trying to be more like you," I said. "Self-sufficient. Following my own dreams." She didn't have an answer for that, so I left her standing in the kitchen and went to meet my friends. At the bowling alley, Rick was telling a story about his ex-wife's attempts to get more alimony when he noticed my expression. "You okay, Miller? You look like you're thinking heavy thoughts." "Just wondering," I said, "how you know when a marriage is really over." The guys got quiet. These weren't the kind of conversations we usually had over beer and strikes, but something about the way I'd asked the question made them take it seriously. "For me," Rick said finally, "it was when I realized I was happier when she wasn't around. When her car in the driveway felt like a problem instead of a relief." Steve nodded. "My ex started treating me like a roommate she didn't particularly like. Everything I did was wrong, but she couldn't be bothered to tell me what right would look like. The real sign," Danny said, "is when you stop caring about fixing it. When you're not angry or hurt anymore. Just done. Done." Yeah, that sounded about right. I bowled a 187 that night, my best score in years. When I got home, Elena was already asleep, and I realized I was relieved not to have to continue our earlier conversation. I had no idea what I was going to do about my marriage, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had options, and that felt pretty damn good. The bowling league had become my Thursday night sanctuary, but this particular Thursday was different. As I was lacing up my rental shoes, I noticed a familiar figure at the bar, Trevor Kowalski, nursing a beer and checking his phone every 30 seconds like he was waiting for someone. "Hey, Miller," Rick said, following my gaze. "Isn't that the car dealer your wife knows? The one from her Facebook posts?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice neutral. That's Trevor. What Rick didn't know, what none of my friends knew, was that Trevor was supposed to be having dinner with Elena right now. She'd left the house an hour ago, wearing another new dress, claiming she and Margot were meeting with potential investors at Romano's, an Italian place across town. Romano's was 20 miles from this bowling alley. Trevor being here meant one of two things. Either he'd bailed on Elena, or Elena had lied about where she was going. Again. I bowled 3 frames while keeping an eye on Trevor, who seemed increasingly agitated as time passed. Finally, his phone buzzed and he answered it immediately. "Where the hell are you?" he said, loud enough for half the bowling alley to hear. "I've been waiting for 45 minutes. A pause, then, "What do you mean you can't make it?" "Elena, we had plans." Elena. So she had stood him up. Interesting. "Fine," Trevor continued, his voice getting louder. "But this is getting old. I'm not some backup plan you can use when it's convenient." He hung up and slammed his beer bottle down hard enough that the bartender looked over with concern. Trevor threw a 20 on the bar and stalked out, nearly knocking over a waitress on his way. "Drama," Steve observed. "Glad that's not my problem anymore." But it was my problem, wasn't it? Or maybe it was Elena's problem, and I was just a spectator now. Either way, I was curious about what had caused Elena to cancel on her boyfriend. It wasn't like her to disrupt her carefully orchestrated double life. I found out when I got home. Elena was in the living room, still wearing the dress she'd put on for Trevor, but her makeup was smudged and she'd been crying. Sophie was sitting next to her on the couch, looking uncomfortable, while Mia hovered in the doorway like she wasn't sure whether to come in or run upstairs. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. "Margot," Elena said, her voice thick with tears. "She's been lying to me about everything." I sat down in the chair across from the couch, noting that Sophie immediately got up and escaped upstairs. Smart kid. "What kind of lies?" "The investment opportunity she's been talking about? The development project? It's all fake. She's been using me to get information about my clients, about properties that might go on the market." Elena wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara further. "She's been playing me for months." Mia drifted closer, and I pulled her onto my lap. At 10, she was still young enough to want comfort when the adults in her life were upset, even if she didn't understand why. "How did you find out?" I asked. "I went to meet her tonight, and she wasn't there, but her business partner was. He told me everything. How Margot's been feeding him inside information, how she's been using our friendship to get access to my client list." Elena's voice cracked. "She's been sabotaging me, David, stealing my deals, undercutting my prices, my own best friend." I felt a strange mix of sympathy and satisfaction. Sympathy because Elena was genuinely hurt. Whatever else was wrong between us, I didn't like seeing her in pain. Satisfaction because Elena was finally getting a taste of what betrayal felt like. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "That's a terrible thing for a friend to do." I trusted her completely. I told her everything, about work, about... Elena glanced at Mia and stopped herself. "About everything." About Trevor, she meant. About her affair, her plans, her dissatisfaction with our marriage. Elena had been confiding in Margot, and Margot had been using that information for her own purposes. I wondered what else Margot knew and what she planned to do with it. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know. I can't prove any of it. It's her word against mine, and she's been so careful." Elena looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, like she actually needed me. "I might have to leave the real estate company. Start over somewhere else." Start over. Elena had been talking about new beginnings for months, but not like this. Not as the victim of someone else's manipulation. "We'll figure it out," I said, surprised to hear myself using the word we. "You're good at what you do. If you have to start over, you'll land on your feet." Elena stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. You're not angry? Why would I be angry? Because this affects all of us. If I have to leave the company, we'll lose income. We might have to. She gestured around our living room, with its expensive furniture and carefully chosen decorations. We might have to make changes. Changes. Elena was terrified of changes, at least the kind that moved backward instead of forward. She'd spent our entire marriage climbing toward a lifestyle that matched her ambitions, and the thought of sliding back down that ladder was probably more frightening than losing her best friend. We'll manage, I said. We always do. That night, after Mia had gone to bed and Elena had finally stopped crying, we sat in the living room like we used to years ago before everything got so complicated. I'm sorry, Elena said suddenly. For what? For being so absent lately. So focused on work and my friends that I haven't been paying attention to what was happening at home. She looked at me across the coffee table. You've been different these past few weeks, happier, more like the person I married. The person she married. I tried to remember who that had been, what he'd wanted from life. He'd been younger, more optimistic, more willing to believe that love was enough to build a life on. He'd also been more naive about what marriage actually required. Maybe we both needed to remember who we used to be, I said. Elena nodded, then got up and came over to sit next to me on the couch. It was the closest we'd been in months, physically and emotionally. I've made mistakes, she said quietly. I've been selfish, and I've taken you for granted. I don't want to lose what we have. What we have. I wondered if Elena had any idea what we actually had left, or if she was just scared of being alone after losing both her best friend and her boyfriend in the same night. We don't have to figure everything out tonight, I said, which was true enough. Let's just take it one day at a time. Elena leaned against me, and I put my arm around her. She felt smaller than I remembered, more fragile. For a moment, I could almost forget about Trevor and the lies and the months of feeling like a stranger in my own life. But only for a moment. Because even as I held my wife and listened to her talk about new beginnings and second chances, I knew that some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. They could only be replaced. The question was, what did I want to replace our marriage with? And was Elena going to give me a choice in the matter? Elena's reconciliation lasted exactly 11 days. For those 11 days, she was the wife I'd married 15 years ago. She cooked dinner, asked about my day, showed interest in the girls' school activities. She even came to one of my bowling league nights, charming my friends and acting like the supportive spouse she'd never quite managed to be during our actual marriage. But I could see the cracks. The way she checked her phone obsessively, then put it away with a frustrated expression. The way she'd start to say something about Margot, then catch herself. The way she'd look at me sometimes like she was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't understand. On day 12, she broke. I was in my office, working on a laptop that had been infected with more malware than a pirate's treasure chest, when I heard Elena on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was low and urgent, the way people talk when they're trying not to be overheard. I know. But things are complicated right now. No, David doesn't suspect anything. He's been different lately, but not suspicious. More like, I don't know, more confident or something. A pause, then, Trevor, we can't keep doing this. Margot knows everything, and if she decides to cause trouble, yes, I know what we talked about. But that was before. Before Margot's betrayal. Before Elena's temporary return to our marriage, before whatever conversation she and Trevor had been having about their future. I need time to think, to figure out what I really want. Another pause, longer this time. Don't give me ultimatums. I'm not some teenager you can pressure into. Fine. We'll talk tomorrow. She hung up, and I heard her footsteps moving toward the living room. I saved my work and sat back in my chair, processing what I'd just heard. Elena was still involved with Trevor. The reconciliation, the renewed interest in our marriage, the sudden affection, it was all performance. She was keeping me as a backup plan while she figured out her next move. I should have been angry, should have stormed into the living room and confronted her, demanded the truth, forced the crisis that had been building for months. Instead, I felt something closer to admiration. Elena was playing a complex game, managing multiple relationships while protecting her own interests. It was manipulative as hell, but it wasn't stupid. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I found my answer the next evening when Elena announced she was going out with some women from the office to celebrate a successful closing. She'd gotten dressed up again, not as dramatically as during her peak Trevor period, but enough to signal that this wasn't really about celebrating with female colleagues. "Don't wait up," she said, kissing my cheek with the casual affection she'd been performing for the past 2 weeks. "Have fun," I replied, then waited exactly 15 minutes before calling Jake. "Hey, want to grab a beer? I feel like getting out of the house." We met at Murphy's Tavern, our usual dive, but instead of our normal corner booth, I chose a table near the window with a clear view of the street. Jake was telling me about some drama at work when I saw Elena's white BMW drive past, heading toward downtown. "You okay, Miller? You seem distracted." "Just thinking about some things I need to take care of," I said, finishing my beer. "Actually, I should probably head home. Rain check on the second round?" Jake looked confused but nodded, and we parted ways in the parking lot. Instead of going home, I drove downtown and parked across from Vintage and Vine. Sure enough, Elena's car was there, and through the window I could see her at a corner table with Trevor. But they weren't alone. Margot was there too, and from their body language it wasn't a friendly reunion. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see the tension. Margot was leaning forward, talking intently, while Elena and Trevor listened with obvious discomfort. At one point, Trevor stood up like he was going to leave, but Margot said something that made him sit back down. This went on for about 20 minutes before Margot got up and left, walking past my car without noticing me. Elena and Trevor stayed, but the romantic atmosphere was clearly gone. They looked like two people trying to solve a problem they didn't understand. I drove home and was in bed pretending to sleep when Elena came in at 11:45. She moved quietly through her nighttime routine, but I could feel the tension radiating from her even in the dark. The next morning, she was distracted and short-tempered with the girls. When Sophie asked if she could go to a friend's house after school, Elena snapped at her for not giving more notice. When Mia spilled orange juice on the counter, Elena acted like it was a personal attack. "Everything okay?" I asked as Elena was getting ready for work. "Fine," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Just work stress." Work stress. Right. That evening, Elena's phone rang during dinner. She glanced at the caller ID and her face went pale. "I need to take this," she said, stepping into the living room. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could hear Elena's tone, defensive, then angry, then something that sounded like pleading. When she came back to the kitchen, she looked like she'd aged 5 years. "Who was that?" I asked. "Work," Elena said, but her hands were shaking as she picked up her fork. After dinner, while Elena was upstairs helping Mia with homework, I checked her Facebook page. She hadn't posted anything in 3 days, which was unusual for someone who normally documented every meal and social interaction. Trevor's page was similarly quiet, except for one post from that morning. Sometimes you have to make hard choices. Not everyone will understand, but that's their problem. Living my best life? No regrets. No regrets. That sounded like a man preparing to do something drastic. I was about to close Facebook when I noticed a new message notification. Someone had sent me a friend request, Margot Chen. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then accepted the request. Immediately, another notification appeared. A private message from Margot. "We need to talk. It's about Elena and Trevor. Meet me at Starbucks on Main Street tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. I looked at the message for a full minute, weighing my options. Margot had betrayed Elena professionally and was clearly involved in whatever drama was unfolding between Elena and Trevor. Meeting with her would be like stepping into the middle of a war zone. On the other hand, I was tired of being the only person who didn't know what was really going on in my own life. I typed back, "I'll be there." Then I deleted the message thread and closed Facebook, wondering what the hell I was getting myself into. Margot was already waiting when I arrived at Starbucks, sitting in a corner booth with a large coffee and a tablet open in front of her. She looked different than I remembered from the few times we'd met socially. Older, more serious, like someone who'd been carrying a heavy burden for too long. "David," she said as I approached, "thank you for coming." I ordered a coffee and sat down across from her, noting that she'd chosen a table where we could see the entire cafe but couldn't easily be overheard. "So," I said, "what's this about?" Margot closed her tablet and looked at me directly. "How much do you know about what Elena's been doing?" "That's a pretty broad question. Let me be more specific. Do you know about Trevor?" I sipped my coffee, buying time while I decided how much to reveal. "I know they've been spending time together." Spending time together. Margot's laugh had no humor in it. "That's one way to put it. They've been having an affair for 7 months, David. And it's not just casual. They've been making plans." "What kind of plans?" Margot opened her tablet and turned it toward me. On the screen was what looked like a real estate listing for a condo in Phoenix. Expensive, modern, the kind of place Elena had always said she wanted to live. Trevor's been planning to relocate his business, expand into the Arizona market. He's been trying to convince Elena to go with him. I stared at the listing, processing the implications. "And Elena's been considering it?" "More than considering. She's been researching divorce lawyers, looking into custody arrangements, figuring out how to liquidate assets without raising suspicions." Margot swiped to another screen, showing what appeared to be a legal document. "She's been planning to leave you, David, take the girls and start over with Trevor in Phoenix." The legal document was a consultation summary from a family law attorney dated 3 weeks ago. Elena's name was at the top, and the notes included phrases like irreconcilable differences, primary custody, and asset protection strategies. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because Elena's not the only one who's been making plans." Margot's expression hardened. "She thinks she's so smart, playing everyone against each other, but she's not as careful as she thinks she is." "What do you mean?" Margot leaned forward. "Elena's been embezzling money from our real estate company, small amounts over several months, thinking no one would notice. She's been building a nest egg for her new life with Trevor." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "You can prove this?" "I can prove all of it. The affair, the embezzlement, the plans to relocate. Elena's been so focused on managing her double life that she's left a trail of evidence a mile wide." "So why haven't you reported her?" "Because I wanted to give her a chance to come clean, to end things with Trevor and try to save her marriage." Margot's voice got bitter. "But Elena doesn't want to be saved. She wants to have her cake and eat it too. Keep you as a safety net while she figures out if Trevor's really going to follow through on his promises." I thought about Elena's behavior over the past 2 weeks, the sudden renewed interest in our marriage, the performance of being a loving wife, the way she'd been playing for time. "What changed?" I asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Trevor's getting impatient. He's given Elena an ultimatum: make a decision by this weekend, or he's moving to Phoenix without her." Margot showed me another screen, this one showing text messages between Elena and Trevor. "And Elena's decided to force the issue." The text messages were from the night before. "Trevor, I'm done waiting. Either you're in or you're out." Elena, "I need more time. David's been suspicious lately." Trevor, "You said that 3 weeks ago. I'm not putting my life on hold forever." Elena, "What if there was another way?" What if David wasn't a factor anymore? Trevor. What are you talking about? Elena. I'm talking about making the decision for him, forcing his hand. Trevor. Elena, what are you planning? Elena. Let me handle it. By Monday, this will all be resolved. I read the messages twice, trying to understand what Elena meant by forcing his hand and making the decision for me. What do you think she's planning? I asked. I think she's going to create a crisis that makes staying married impossible. Maybe she'll confess to the affair and blame you for driving her to it. Maybe she'll claim you've been abusive or controlling. Maybe she'll just take the girls and disappear, forcing you to fight for custody from a disadvantaged position. All of those scenarios sounded plausible, and all of them would leave me scrambling to respond to Elena's narrative instead of controlling my own story. Why are you warning me? I asked. I thought you and Elena were best friends. We were, but Elena's not the person I thought she was. She's selfish and manipulative, and she doesn't care who gets hurt as long as she gets what she wants. Margot's voice was steady, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She's been using me for months, David. Using our friendship to get information she could leverage for her own benefit. When I confronted her about it, she didn't even deny it. She just said that's how business works. So this is revenge. This is justice. Elena's been playing games with people's lives, and it's time someone called her on it. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process everything Margot had told me. Elena wasn't just having an affair. She was planning to destroy our family to cover her tracks. The reconciliation, the renewed affection, the promises of working things out. It was all manipulation, designed to keep me off balance until she was ready to make her move. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to be prepared. Elena's going to try to blindside you, probably this weekend. She's going to create some kind of dramatic confrontation that puts you on the defensive and makes her look like the victim. And you think I should what? Confront her first? I think you should protect yourself and your daughters. Elena's not thinking about what's best for Sophie and Mia. She's only thinking about what's best for Elena. Margot was right about that. Elena had always been self-centered, but I'd assumed she'd put the girls' interests first when it came to major life decisions. The idea that she'd uproot them from their schools, their friends, their entire lives, just to start over with Trevor and Phoenix, that was a level of selfishness I hadn't expected, even from Elena. What evidence do you have? I asked. Margot slid a USB drive across the table. Financial records showing the embezzlement, screenshots of text messages and social media posts, photos of Elena and Trevor together, documentation of her meetings with the divorce attorney, everything you'd need to protect yourself in court. I picked up the USB drive, feeling its weight in my palm. Such a small thing to contain the destruction of a 15-year marriage. There's one more thing, Margot said. Elena doesn't know I have any of this. She thinks I'm just bitter about our friendship ending. If you use this information, she'll know it came from me. And you're okay with that? I'm done protecting Elena from the consequences of her choices. She made her bed. Let her lie in it. I pocketed the USB drive and stood up. Thank you for the warning. David, Margot called as I was walking away. Whatever you decide to do it soon. Elena's not going to wait much longer, and once she makes her move, your options will be a lot more limited. I drove home thinking about Elena's text messages to Trevor, about her plans to force my hand and make the decision for me. For months, I'd been a passive observer of my own life, watching my marriage fall apart without taking any action to stop it or speed it up. But Elena was about to take that choice away from me. She was planning to control the narrative, to cast herself as the victim and me as the obstacle to her happiness. Well, maybe it was time I started writing my own story. I spent Friday evening in my office going through the files on Margot's USB drive. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Financial records showing Elena had embezzled nearly $30,000 over 6 months, Screenshots of intimate text messages between Elena and Trevor, photos of them together at restaurants and hotels, and detailed notes from Elena's consultations with divorce attorneys. But the most revealing documents were Elena's own notes, apparently saved in a cloud storage account she thought was private. Pages of planning for her new life with Trevor, research on Phoenix neighborhoods, schools for the girls, job opportunities in Arizona real estate. She'd even looked into changing Sophie and Mia's last names to Kowalski. Reading through Elena's secret plans felt like discovering that a stranger had been living in my house, wearing my wife's face while plotting the destruction of everything I thought we'd built together. The woman who'd been performing reconciliation for the past 2 weeks had been simultaneously planning to kidnap my daughters and start a new life with her boyfriend. The final document was a timeline, apparently Elena's plan for the next week. Saturday, create confrontation with David. Use his recent behavior, going out, new friends, independence, as evidence of abandonment, emotional abuse. Sunday, move girls to Margot's temporarily for their safety. Monday, file emergency custody petition. Claim David has become unstable, threatening. Tuesday, meet with mediator to discuss amicable divorce terms. Wednesday, finalize Phoenix arrangements with Trevor. Elena was planning to frame me as an abusive husband who'd become dangerous, use that narrative to get temporary custody of the girls, then leverage their safety to force me into accepting her divorce terms. By the time I could respond legally, she'd already have control of the children and the moral high ground. It was a smart plan, ruthless but smart. Too bad for Elena that I wasn't going to let her execute it. Saturday morning, Elena was unusually tense. She kept checking her phone and watching me like she was waiting for something. The girls were both home, Sophie sleeping late as usual, Mia watching cartoons in the living room, which meant Elena couldn't start her planned confrontation without an audience. "I'm going to run some errands," I announced after breakfast. "Need anything while I'm out?" Elena looked surprised. "What errands?" "Just some stuff I've been putting off. I'll be back this afternoon." I could see Elena calculating, trying to figure out if my absence would disrupt her timeline. Finally, she shrugged. "Okay, I'll be here with the girls." My first stop was the bank, where I withdrew half of our joint savings account, legally my right as a joint account holder, and something Elena couldn't claim was theft or abuse. My second stop was a copy center, where I printed multiple sets of all the evidence from Margot's USB drive. My third stop was my attorney's office. I'd called Jim Morrison that morning, waking him up to schedule an emergency Saturday appointment. Jim had handled our house purchase and wills, so he knew our family situation, but I'd never discussed divorce with him. "Jesus, David," he said, after reviewing the documents I'd brought. "Your wife's been planning this for months. The embezzlement alone could result in criminal charges." "I don't want to destroy Elena," I said. "I just want to protect my daughters and make sure I'm not steamrolled by her narrative." "Well, you're in a strong position legally. The evidence of adultery and financial misconduct gives you significant leverage in custody and asset division." Jim leaned back in his chair. "The question is, what do you want to do with that leverage?" "I want Elena to be honest, to stop playing games and take responsibility for her choices." "And if she won't?" "Then I want to make sure Sophie and Mia understand what really happened here, that their father didn't abandon them or become abusive, that their mother chose to break up our family for her own selfish reasons." Jim nodded. "I can draft divorce papers citing adultery and financial misconduct. We can also file for emergency custody if Elena tries to take the girls out of state. Do it. But don't file anything yet. I want to give Elena one chance to come clean on her own terms." I got home at 3 p.m. to find Elena pacing in the kitchen like a caged animal. Sophie was at a friend's house, and Mia was upstairs in her room, which meant Elena had been waiting all day for the right moment to start her planned confrontation. "Where have you been?" she demanded as soon as I walked in. "I told you, running errands." "What errands? You were gone for 5 hours." I could see Elena working herself up to the performance she'd planned. but something in my manner must have warned her that things weren't going according to script. "Elena," I said calmly, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About Trevor. About the money you've been stealing from your company. About your plans to take the girls to Phoenix." Elena went very still. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the screenshots from Margot's files, Elena and Trevor kissing outside a hotel. "You've been having an affair for 7 months. You've embezzled almost $30,000 to fund your new life with Trevor. And you've been planning to frame me as an abusive husband so you can get custody of Sophie and Mia." Elena stared at the photo, her face cycling through surprise, anger, and calculation. "Where did you get this? Does it matter? The question is, what are you going to do now that your plan is blown?" Elena sat down heavily at the kitchen table. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd married, vulnerable, uncertain, human. Then her expression hardened. "Fine," she said. "You want honesty? Here's honesty. I haven't been happy in this marriage for years. You're boring, David. You're predictable and small and content with mediocrity. I want more than this." She gestured around our kitchen, our house, our life. "I want passion and excitement and a partner who challenges me to be better. And Trevor provides that. Trevor sees my potential. He believes in my dreams. He doesn't just want me to be satisfied with being a suburban housewife. I never wanted you to be just a housewife. I supported your career, your ambitions. You supported the version of my ambitions that didn't threaten you. But when I started succeeding, when I started wanting more, you got uncomfortable. There was some truth in that, I had to admit. Elena's increasing focus on her career and social life had made me feel left behind, unimportant. But that didn't justify adultery and embezzlement and plans to kidnap our children. "What about Sophie and Mia?" I asked. "Were you really planning to take them away from their home, their schools, their friends?" "I was planning to give them a better life. Phoenix has excellent schools, and Trevor's business is expanding. They'd have opportunities there they'll never have in this dead-end town." "You were planning to change their last name to Kowalski." Elena flinched. "How did you—" She stopped herself. "That was just an idea. Nothing definite." "Elena, you were going to erase me from their lives, make them think their father abandoned them. I was going to protect them from a bitter custody battle, by lying to them about who I am and what happened to our marriage." Elena stood up, her composure finally cracking. "You want to know what happened to our marriage, David? You gave up. You stopped trying to be the man I fell in love with. You became comfortable and complacent and boring. So yes, I found someone who still sees me as worth fighting for." "And the embezzlement? Was that Trevor's idea too?" "That money was mine. I earned it. I just redirected it. You stole it from your own company to fund your affair. I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back." "With what? Trevor's used car profits?" Elena's face flushed with anger. "You don't get to judge me. You checked out of this marriage years ago. You just went through the motions while I tried to keep us interesting, keep us growing. By lying and cheating and stealing? By refusing to settle for less than I deserve?" We stared at each other across the kitchen table, 15 years of marriage reduced to this moment of brutal honesty. Elena was right about some things. I had become complacent, had stopped fighting for our relationship. But her response to that complacency had been to become someone I didn't recognize. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now you decide whether you want to make this easy or hard." "What does easy look like?" "Uncontested divorce. We split assets 50-50, joint custody of the girls, no drama. You get to keep your dignity, and I get to start over with Trevor." "And hard?" "Hard means I tell everyone you've been emotionally abusive, that you've been controlling and manipulative, and that I had to have an affair to remember what it felt like to be valued. Hard means a custody battle, where I paint you as an unstable husband who abandoned his family for his drinking buddies and poker games." It was exactly the plan I'd read about in her notes. But hearing Elena threaten me with it directly was still shocking. "There's a third option," I said. "Which is?" "I take these photos and financial records to the police and your real estate company. I file for divorce, citing adultery and embezzlement. I get full custody of the girls because you're facing criminal charges." Elena went pale. "You wouldn't." "Try me." We looked at each other across the kitchen table, two people who'd once promised to love each other forever, now negotiating the terms of our mutual destruction. "What do you want, David?" "I want you to tell Sophie and Mia the truth. That you fell in love with someone else and want to start a new life with him. No lies about me being abusive or abandoning the family. No rewriting history to make yourself the victim. And in return? In return, I don't press charges for the embezzlement. We do an uncontested divorce with joint custody, and you get to leave with some dignity intact." Elena considered this for a long moment. "And if I refuse?" "Then we do this the hard way, and trust me, Elena, I have better evidence than you do." The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Mia's television upstairs. Elena stared at her hands, probably realizing that her carefully constructed plan had collapsed completely. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I make the decision for you." Elena looked up sharply, recognizing her own words from the text messages to Trevor. "I guess we both learned how to play games," I said. That evening, Elena called Trevor and told him she needed more time. I could hear his angry response through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. When she hung up, she looked defeated. "He's leaving for Phoenix on Monday," she said. "With or without me." "I'm sorry." "Are you? Really?" I thought about it. "I'm sorry you're in pain. I'm sorry our marriage failed, but I'm not sorry that your plan to frame me as an abuser didn't work out." Elena nodded slowly. "I suppose that's fair." Sunday morning, Elena came downstairs dressed for church, something she hadn't done in months. Sophie and Mia were already at the kitchen table, eating cereal and arguing about whose turn it was to load the dishwasher. "Girls," Elena said, "I need to talk to you both about something important." They looked up, suddenly alert to the serious tone in their mother's voice. "Your father and I have decided to get divorced." Sophie's spoon clattered into her bowl. Mia just stared. "It's not anyone's fault," Elena continued, and I was surprised to hear her sticking to our agreement. "Sometimes people grow apart, and they're happier living separate lives." "Are you moving out?" Sophie asked. "I'm going to get my own apartment, but you'll spend time with both of us, and we'll both still be your parents." "Is it because of Trevor?" Sophie asked, and Elena's face went white. "How do you know about Trevor?" "Mom, I'm 14. I see your Facebook posts. I see how you smile when he comments on your photos." Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. "Are you going to marry him?" Elena looked at me, then back at Sophie. "I don't know. Maybe someday. But right now, I just need to figure out how to be happy on my own." Mia started crying, and Elena moved to comfort her. For a moment, we looked like a normal family dealing with a difficult situation. Then the moment passed, and we were just four people trying to figure out how to move forward from the wreckage of what we'd built together. Elena moved out the following weekend. She rented a small apartment across town and took a job with a different real estate company. Her old firm had decided not to press charges for the embezzlement, but they'd made it clear she wasn't welcome back. Trevor left for Phoenix as planned, alone. Elena never talked about what had happened between them, but I gathered that his ultimatum had backfired. He'd wanted a woman who'd risk everything for love, and Elena had turned out to be too practical for grand romantic gestures. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Elena got joint custody of the girls and half of our assets, minus the money she'd embezzled. I got the house and the satisfaction of knowing that Sophie and Mia understood what had really happened to our family. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I first overheard Elena saying that friends were forever but husbands came and go. But it was honest, which was more than our marriage had been for a long time. And sometimes, honesty is the best revenge of all.